Hi, boys and girls. This is Mr. Brian. I hope you guys had a great Halloween, and I'm glad to see you guys are back again for another story time and some music with Miss Lorilyn. So, we're going to continue on with our story of Abram. If you remember last time, Abram and Sarai, they were told to take a long trip away from their house, and God told them to take this trip, and they listened to God, and they obeyed God, and they took this trip, and God made some promises to them. One, that their descendants would be like the stars in the sky, that there would be too many to count. And so we got a couple more stories of Abram and Sarai for you guys today. So we're going to get right into it. This story is called The Unbelievable Special Promise. God will fulfill every promise he makes, no matter how impossible it seems. God had taken Abram and Sarai on a journey and shown them a beautiful land that would be their families one day. Abram and Sarai were confused because they were so old, way too old to have babies. But they loved God and they believed him. But as year after year went by, they still didn't have a child. They started thinking that maybe they didn't understand what God had said. Because now Abram was 99 years old, and Sarai was 90 years old, and they still didn't have a baby. Then God spoke to Abram with words that were full of love and assurance. He told Abram that he was making a special promise with him, a promise that is called a covenant. A covenant is a promise that lasts forever and that is filled with love and can never be broken. God told Abram that his covenant with him was that all of God's people from then on were going to come from Abram and Sarai. He told him that kings would come from them, but that most important of all, God's people would come from Abram. The covenant meant that God would love everyone on earth, but that he would have a special people to be his. This people would someday have soft hearts that could love and hear and obey God the way Adam and Eve did in the garden before they listened to the snake and disobeyed God. And there's Abram with his sheep. God told Abram that as a sign of this promise, Abram and Sarai would get new names, Abraham and Sarah, and that soon God was going to give them a son, and they should name him Isaac. Well, this all sounded pretty amazing, like pretty amazing news, right? It was, except Abraham was super extremely unbelievably old, remember? And God had been talking about giving Abraham a son for a long time. It just seemed a little bit unbelievable, so Abraham fell on the ground and laughed. Seriously, the Bible said that he fell on the ground and laughed. Abraham told a friend that he needed to find Sarah and give her God's message that she was going to have a son. Well, Sarah was behind the tent door, listening, and heard what Abraham said. And you know what? She did exactly what Abraham did. She laughed too. And here they are laughing. God told Abraham that Sarah had heard and had laughed, but God wasn't laughing. God was serious. He reminded Abraham that nothing is impossible with God. And God was right, because just as he said, a little while later, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who they named Isaac, just as God had told them. It seemed crazy, silly even, for someone as old as Sarah to have a baby. But God had told Abraham that was the plan. One thing we always see is that God does what he says he will do. So just like he said, Isaac was born, and when he was, his mommy and daddy weren't laughing. Instead, they were filled with love and joy because they realized God always keeps his promises, even when they seem impossible. I bet that your mommy and daddy were filled with love and joy that you were born to. And if we get into our questions, there they are with their little baby Isaac. So the first question, what was the special kind of promise called that God made with Abraham? That's right, it's called a covenant. And if God was going to make a covenant with you, what would you want it to be? Okay. And then what did Abraham and Sarah do when they heard God was giving Sarah a baby at her old age? That's right, they laughed. And what did God remind Abraham of after he and Sarah laughed at the news? Right, that there is nothing impossible with God. So we're going to go to music time now with Miss Lorilyn. So, and then come back and we'll have another story about Abraham and Isaac, as Isaac grows up to be a young man. So come back and enjoy the music time with Lorilyn. Okay, see you in a little bit.
Hi everyone, thanks for the story, Brian. Are you kids ready to praise God with our songs together? Let's get started. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Aiden and Alton, love the Lord your God. James and Ellie, love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Rose and Winston, love the Lord your God. Bentley and Raven, love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Crane and Diana, love the Lord your God. Fitzy and Owen, love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Joey and Brian, love the Lord your God. Lorilyn and everyone, love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. Love, 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 oh love the Lord your God. God said love is patient. God said love is kind. God said love is patient, love is kind. God said love is patient. God said love is kind. God said love is patient, love is kind. Make yourself small and whisper, love is patient, love is kind. Sit up and clap your hands and say it, love is patient, love is kind. Raise your to the sky and sing it, love is patient, love is kind. God said love is patient, God said love is kind. God said love is patient, love is kind. God says love is patient, God says love is kind. God said love is patient, love is kind. Make yourself small and whisper, love is patient, love is kind. Sit up and clap your hands and say it, love is patient, love is kind. Reach up to the sky and sing it, love is patient, love is kind. Have your scarves ready? All right, here's mine. Okay. You might see people do this with them. You know that's not what we're going to do. Here we go. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm going to let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let Satan get it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let Satan get it out. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Good job. When I'm outside playing in the yard, I can talk to God, I can talk to God. When I'm inside resting in my bed, I can talk to God, I can talk to God. I can tell God all about my day, ask Him to help me to live in His way. Then I love you is what I say, 'cause I can talk to God anytime. When I'm at home and I can't play with my friends, I can talk to God, I can talk to God. When I'm at home and I cannot go to church, I can talk to God, I can talk to God. I can tell God all about my day, ask Him to help me to live in His way. Then I love you is what I say, 'cause I can talk to God anytime. I can talk to God anytime. I can talk to God anytime. Well, let's get finished up. Here we go. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. Here we go. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Because He first loved me. Bye. See you next time.
Welcome back, kids. That was great. Thank you, Miss Lorilyn, for leading us in music time. Great singing, kids. So now we are going to read another story about Abraham and Isaac. And I'll show you the picture right here. Isaac is a little boy now. Okay, he's growing up. He's no longer a baby. And so we're gonna jump ahead and see what the story is about. The story is called A Sacrificial Promise. God will provide the sacrifice for our sins. Abraham and Sarah were happy to have Isaac. They were old, but God gave them lots of energy so that they could play with Isaac and teach him all the things that he needed to know. As the years passed and Isaac grew into a little boy, Abraham continued to love and obey God. Abraham knew that the only possible way that Isaac could have been born was because God always kept His promises. So Abraham continued to bravely obey God. Before we keep going with Abraham's story, you need to know some words from the Bible that we haven't talked about yet. Words that Abraham knew well. First, you need to know the word sin. A sin is anything that someone does that is disobeying God. Adam and Eve had sinned when they disobeyed God and listened to the snake instead. And because they were the very first parents and everyone came from them, everyone else sinned too. This means there was a lot of sin in the world, and sin makes us separated from God, which is a big problem that leads to the next important word we need to learn that has to do with sin: sacrifice. God had made a rule for his people. All sin had to be punished. But because he loved them, he made a way so that they wouldn't get the whole punishment they deserved. Instead of being punished themselves, the people would have to give something special to God that could take the punishment for them. They had to give God one of their very best animals. This gift was a sacrifice. The animals weren't pets. The animals had been kept to make food or become food. So when the people gave a really good animal to God and the punishment was put on it, the people still felt bad. Giving up a good animal didn't feel happy, but sin shouldn't make us feel happy. It should make us give a sacrifice. When the people gave sacrifices, it also showed that they believed God would keep his promise to give them food to eat. The people would make a special place of worship called an altar, where they would pray to God and ask him to forgive their sins. Then they would put the animal on top of the altar and kill it. Now this might all sound sort of scary or sad, and it was, but remember how God had said there would be death because Adam and Eve ate the fruit on that one tree in the garden. Well, this was one of the kinds of death God knew had to happen because of their sin. Here's the really good, amazing, unbelievable, makes it so much better news. We don't have to kill animals anymore because of our sin. Why? Well, God is going to show us part of the answer through this story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham knew all about killing an animal to obey God because of his sin. He had learned that God loved him and that God always keeps his promises. And Abraham knew he could trust God. One morning, with all this in Abraham's mind, God told him to do something that is probably going to sound confusing. God told Abraham to take Isaac, the son he loved so much, up the mountain and to kill him as a sacrifice for sin. Did you hear that? God told Abraham to kill his son, the son he loved so much. Abraham definitely didn't want to do that, but he knew he must obey God. Abraham told Isaac to go with him up the mountain to give the sacrifice for their sins. Along the way, Isaac was confused and began to ask his daddy where the animal was for the sacrifice. His father told him not to worry, that God would provide the animal. Up the mountain they walked, and God showed Abraham where to stop. Abraham built an altar where he would lay the animal to be killed. Only this time, there wasn't an animal. His heart must have been beating so hard, and he probably had tears in his eyes as he worried that maybe God really was going to make him kill his own son. There's Abraham and Isaac as they're going up the mountain, the wood. Abraham stacked the wood on the altar, and he even tied Isaac up and put him on the wood. Isaac must have been so confused and scared, and he probably cried as his daddy raised the knife in the air above him. But just then, with the knife in the air, about to come down on Isaac, God spoke loudly to Abraham and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He told Abraham to put his hand down and to look in a nearby bush. There, caught in the branches, was an animal. Now Abraham could sacrifice that instead of Isaac. God had provided the sacrifice. I'm sure Abraham gave Isaac a huge hug as he took him off the altar. Abraham had obeyed God and had been willing to give God the thing he loved most, his son. So God said that he would bless Abraham and his whole family and take care of them for all generations. And there was a day coming when God would promise to give them a perfect sacrifice so that we would never ever have to make any sacrifices again. And so here we are. There's Abraham on the altar over here. And you can see over here we have the little ram that was caught for the in the bushes for the sacrifice. So here are our questions for this story. What is it called when we disobey God? That's right. It's called a sin. And how did God punish the people's sins? That's right. He asked for a sacrifice, and the sacrifice took care of the punishment. Who did God tell Abraham to sacrifice? That's right. He had to sacrifice his son Isaac. And what did God tell Abraham when his hand was in the air with the knife? He told him to stop, not to kill Isaac, and that they could use the ram that was in the bushes instead. So that's our story about Abraham and Isaac. Next time we're going to have a whole new person that we're going to follow. A little boy who grows up to be a man by the name of Joseph. And so come back and we'll talk about Joseph next week. Until then, I hope you all be well, be safe, and remember, God always loves you. Goodbye, kids.